I'd like to call the meeting to order, so all rise and pledge allegiance to the flag. We have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Wilson. Commissioner Kelly.
Here.
Commissioner London.
Here.
Commissioner Hogan.
Here.
Chairman O'Brien.
Here. Okay, first item is public comment for any items not on tonight's agenda. And just keep in mind, if anybody does have any comments, we're really not in a position to discuss it tonight. It would just be submitted as a record, and it can be follow-up later. So, any public comment?
My notes, it'll be short, okay? William Quinnell, 6280 Horseshoe Bar Road. Oh, I got the green light. The state has really begun to interfere with local control. A current bill that's come to light is AB 68, which basically gives developers the right to cut properties into three and build without any control from the local government. I would hope that the Planning Commission, the town of Loomis, would join any lawsuit to stop this, because it takes we need local control, and we're losing local control every time they pass another bill in the state. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. All right, anybody else? Okay.
Sonia Coupler, 5630 Tudor Way, Loomis. I'd also like to concur with Mr. Quinville's comment about losing local control to the state government. There's more and more bills going through that we're losing our control over what we get to do in our own town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Sue Dobies, 5570 Arcadia Avenue. I would just like to say that I also agree with Mr. Quinville and Ms. Kupler. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further comment, we'll move on to the next item, which would be the adoption of tonight's agenda. So if we can just, do we have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
I so move.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, tonight's agenda has been adopted. Next is public comment on the consent agenda. Okay, seeing none. I would, before we go in and make a motion for approval, do we need to pull the number 4, resolution changing dates of November, December, or is everybody okay with that? We would have to pull it for discussion from consent, discuss and vote on it, or if everybody's fine, we'll just approve it. Okay, then do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I so move.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion passes. The consent agenda has been approved. Next item is public hearing. It's number 5. It's the repeal and replacement of Chapter 1346 of the Loomis Municipal Code, Cannabis Land Use. Okay, Mary Beth, please,
Yes.
or staff report.
Good evening. What you have before you is a public hearing to receive public input and provide a recommendation to the town council on the repeal and reenactment of Chapter 1346, which is your cannabis land use policies in the town. Your recommendation would also include that the project is categorically exempt under CEQA, Class 8. So the staff report kind of goes into the timeline of adoption by the state, and the town's code currently on the books has a moratorium. So the repeal would be to take away what we currently have and to adopt the land use policies recommended, so that personal indoor growing based on state guidelines is still permitted, but commercial activities anywhere would be prohibited.
Okay.
There are a couple of, we found these a little late. There's a couple of corrections, just typographical corrections that need to be addressed. Chapter 1346.500, violations declared public nuisances. It's under section 3. And this is 1346.500A. That first sentence, or second sentence, additionally, adverse effect caused. We're removing the on.
Okay.
And then the next page, section 7, the second line says help, and that should be held. So we would make those corrections prior to forwarding to the council with your recommendation.
Okay.
So another part of this is that our current code sunsets at the end of this year. And if it just went away, then we'd be stuck. So this code here takes that one off the books, although it'd stay in effect until this one is formally on the books. So once it goes to council, they would do a public hearing. 30 days later, do another public hearing, and then it would actually go into effect 30 days after that. So if there's that, a little, probably maybe a week in between, our current code based on this would still stay in effect, and we wouldn't have any gap in coverage.
Okay. I guess my only comment is, it looks like there are no changes from the first code and the second code.
Correct.
Okay, it's just kind of a logistical thing that we've got to do.
Yeah, the
Yes.
first one, uncodified, so this would be codified and
Right.
be totally in place.
Okay. Okay, any other questions from, or comments from commission? From staff?
This would be permanent, and the original was only for a limited period?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, the other one, for original, had a sunset in it,
Yeah.
and so it's expiring, so we just have to, we're not just, in addition to renewing it, we're confirming it in perpetuity, right?
Have we gotten any complaints?
None. No.
Okay. All right, if any other further discussion from the commission? Okay, we'll open up to public comment. All right. Okay, seeing no public,
And Chair Abranovich, just this is a little hyper-technical, but because this is a public hearing, we're opening the public hearing, and then we're going to close the public hearing as to be distinguished from public comment.
okay, so the public hearing on this item?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so public hearing on this item is open, so public comment. Okay, seeing none, go ahead and we'll bring it back, I think, for discussion, deliberation, and then a motion. So before us, basically, it's, we're to forward, it says recommendation is to provide a recommendation to the council on the repeal and reenactment of Chapter 13.46, and also the other part of it is the CEQA portion, a recommendation to the town that this project is categorically exempt under Class 8 of the California Environmental Quality Act. So someone would want to form a motion about of the recommendation, which could be as straightforward as approving this item, this change, or if they have any other. I don't think we have any other suggestions, so I think that's all we need is the motion.
We need to read all that, or just say so move?
You can just say that,
Just reiterate it.
recommend,
Sure.
Okay. Recommend to the town council to repeal and reenactment of chapter 13.46, cannabis land uses in the town of Loomis, including a recommendation to the town council that this project is categorically exempt under Class 8 of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second.
a second.
Okay, we have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly.
Yes.
Commissioner London.
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan.
Yes.
Chairman Ranovich.
Yes. Okay, motion's approved. Okay, next is item number 6, minor land division application number 1918. Staff report, please.
Before we get into the staff report, because this is a quasi-judicial decision that the Planning Commission would be making, I recommend that the Planning Commission disclose any ex parte communications that it has had either with the applicant on this project, neighbors, or members of the public. Such disclosures are required for these types of decisions, and the purpose behind it is just to let everybody in the audience and the applicant know all of the categories of information that you are aware of prior to making a decision on this item.
Okay.
And if you have not spoken with anyone outside of today's meeting, setting aside staff, then you can simply say, I have nothing to disclose.
Do we each have to say that? We have nothing to disclose?
Or do we just say it if we have something?
If you have a disclosure, you can so make that disclosure. You're not required to say anything if you don't have any disclosures to make.
We'll just go down for the record. Everybody just want to comment that they do or don't.
No disclosure.
No.
I have nothing to disclose.
Nothing to disclose.
No.
Okay,
Nothing to disclose.
all right, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on. Mary Beth, please, thank you.
Yes, sir. I don't know how to get rid of that. Do you know how to make it not be blue? Oh, there it goes. For you? Yeah, okay. Good evening once again. What you have in front of you is a public hearing on a minor land division at 3901 Sierra College Boulevard, which is also known as the Loomis Veterinary Clinic. What we're requesting you to do tonight is conduct the public hearing, adopt the notice of exemption, and also a resolution approving the minor land division, which is subject to findings that are expressed in Exhibit A and the recommended conditions of approval in Exhibit B. And Exhibit C is the map depicting the lot adjustment. This application, let me find the clicker. It may be a little confusing. The whole entirety of it is one parcel. There are two individual tax parcels within the one. So the confusing part is, well, it's two parcels and we're going to two parcels, but what we're trying to do is create two legally identified parcels. The whole parcel is considered parcel C, even though they have separate APN numbers. So this particular land division will totally take the buildings and structures and put them on proposed parcel 1 and leave parcel 2 as a vacant, undeveloped parcel. Right now, as you can see, the previous parcel lines, if I can do this, oops. No pointer? Pointer? Oh, there's the pointer. Okay. I have to get closer to see it. The existing configuration goes this way and down. You can see it follow across and then down. The reconfiguration takes it all the way around all the structures and down to the bedroom. Sorry, it's scrolled down. I'm a master at this stuff. Well, it still didn't work very well. One of the biggest consequences on this lot is the floodway. The flood maps were updated last November, which if it were to flood and all the buildings go away at the vet clinic, then it doesn't prohibit them from rebuilding there. It's just the new laws and things of what you can do within that floodway tied to our flood prevention ordinance would have to be followed. So, and the owner, applicant, all of those people have been advised of that and they're very okay with that. They have never experienced a severe flood in that location. The first building that was built, the 10,000 square foot building, is very old. The most newest one, the 8,000 square foot building, was built 1 foot above that grade. There's no flood certificate or anything like that on it, but we know in looking through the building permit records that it was done that way. So the chances of the 8,000 square foot building flooding is pretty nil. But, you know, still, pretty much the whole site is pretty impacted by floodways. Parcel 2, about half of that has that floodway in there. And then in the center of it, there's water wells, which are state ID'd, and they provide public water under the state ID code for a public well. They serve up to 15 customers. I wasn't able to drill down and find out who all gets water from that, but Environmental Health, Water Agency, and all those guys know where those service lines run. And the biggest request there is to expand the easement area around those wells. So right now they don't have that. They want 50 feet around it, so nothing would be built around those, around the wells or the fire suppression tanks that are on the site. So it kind of leaves the major development of the site that would happen maybe down in this corner if and when it ever would. Shared access would be through the main driveway off of Sierra College Boulevard. They'd come off over here, up around, and then into this site, which currently serves as access to the wells for maintenance and all of that. It becomes a public utility easement area. So for tax purposes, what it does currently, with the way the parcel is configured, there's a lot of improvements on the unimproved taxed parcel. So this will allow the proper tax assessments to happen with all of the structures on one parcel and the vacant just wells and fire storage tanks on the other parcel. Included in your packet was a colored, it's a blue map, and those blue areas denote the floodplain within that parcel. There were several comments about that floodway, and you know, everybody was like, oh, you can't do anything, and it's like, well, it doesn't mean you can't. You can, it's just to be determined when and if that ever comes into play. So at this point, no tree removals, no improvements of any kind, just the boundary line change. They have an incredible amount of parking, which is good. And their parking, because of when the buildings were constructed, met the code at the time, which was one space for 500 square feet. Our current code would require the one space per 250 square feet. So we can't do anything about what's existing, but if the building goes away and new construction happens, then that would be a parking requirement to provide parking for 1 in 500 square feet. Agencies, we sent the referrals out, and as you see in your packets, there were 7 outside agencies that replied, and all of their requirements have been rolled in as conditions of approval of the project. So the final map won't be recorded until all of those things are met, including the expansion of the easement area as recorded on the properties and that kind of thing. I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, commissioners.
You said the easement around the wells will be expanded. The health department is requesting the easement around the wells be expanded?
Yes. Environmental health.
Okay. There's just one well, is that correct? One large well?
One well for, yeah, 2 tanks, one well.
Okay.
It's actually 3.
Okay.
Do you know what the concrete pad up in the, almost in the center, at the top, what
that's all about?
I do not. This was one map. I didn't go out and walk the site, otherwise I should know that. I can refer to the engineers, the applicant's engineer, to get a better description of that.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I'm Timothy Blair with Surveyors Group.
Okay.
I produced the map.
Representing the applicant, okay.
Yeah. And the owner told me that it's just an empty pad where a building used to be on it, and it's of no use, and in the future, if it conflicts with any lines, they would remove it. But right now, it's not used for anything. It's just like a foundation of a building that was once there.
Did you have any, are you done, Mary Beth?
I am.
Are we?
I had a question
Yeah,
for you, Mary Beth. I don't really understand what's the purpose of the split.
The purpose would be to contain all of the improvements on one parcel
Okay?
and leave that second parcel vacant with the existing improvements that are on there. And assessor-wise, tax assessor-wise, the current configuration puts some of these improvements on a parcel that the assessor's office doesn't consider an approved, they don't consider the improvements there, so they're paying less in taxes for the whole entirety that it is and not being taxed with those improvements.
I guess part of Mike's question probably is what I'm thinking is how does this come to be to begin with?
That I don't know. I know that the application came in to do it the right
I
way.
mean, originally, when it was set up into two
Yeah,
tax parcels, that's
you know,
never heard that.
those things happen very frequently, from my understanding, in the county back in, pre-Loomis. The assessor would look at a parcel and say, oh, yeah, okay, we'll carve this out and not tax you on that. And So that's how it happened back, I don't even know what year that was, but before Loomis Incorporated. Do you know when?
No, I should.
Yeah.
Looks like they bought the property in '76, but they may have bought that with the existing assessment being split. I don't know, but that's all right.
And it's hard to get back that far to find those records, but even when, in the county GIS system, if you search for 3901 Sierra College Boulevard, it actually pops up both parcels. It's like, no, I just want 3901.
Yeah.
But yeah, because they have two separate parcel numbers, they group them as one.
Okay. Any other questions from the staff? So next round would be to the applicant. You just kind of addressed a question. You have an opportunity to present any more if you have anything. If not, that's fine.
No, the owner has reviewed the comments, and they agree with everything, and they have no issue with any of the proposed conditions of approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, the commission have any questions of the applicant?
No, I was just going to ask, are they okay with the conditions of
Yeah.
approval?
Okay. Okay. All right, so next we'll move on. I guess I need to remind that this item is open as a public hearing, and before we go into public comment. So any public comment?
Sonia Coupler, 5630 Tudor Way, Loomis. I'm just wondering, Mary Beth had mentioned that the buildings were built 1 foot higher up, and there's no flood certificate on it. So if new construction was to go on that area, would they be required to have a flood certificate then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
I thought commercial did not. Am I wrong? I thought residential requires.
There are some different rules, right, for commercial and for residential. Residential are much more stringent.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I think you're correct that the a new construction or replacement of an existing structure in a floodplain, and it's a commercial site, can be a grade.
Can be what? Can be what?
At grade.
At grade.
At grade, okay.
Well, I think
It's- The philosophy is a business takes their own risks and they're
But I think there's,
supposed to know what they're doing, and a residential homeowner comes along, buys a piece of land, they require a little more protection.
yeah, but I'm sure there's additional restrictions for storage of hazardous materials.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There are several
Probably huge.
restrictions, and the applicant has been made aware of, they will have to conform to our flood protection ordinance. It's a thing that we beefed up 2 years ago. The new maps came out. We're also going to make them map the floodplain on this property, so we know exactly what the boundary is. FEMA has got a pretty rough outline of that. And then some of the other restrictions that commercial would be, they can't do any fill in the floodplain or the floodway, so they won't be able to build any structures, even commercial structures, if it's part of the floodway, which is the portion of the channel where the water's moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
In chapter 11.08, there's subsection C2C that provides that non-residential construction shall be certified by a registered professional engineer or architect, that the standards of this subsection are satisfied. Such certification shall be provided to the floodplain administrator.
Okay. All righty. Okay.
That whole section is included in your packet right behind Britt's comment.
And it's a condition of approval number 12.
And I could be misremembering, but that raised building did come to the Planning Commission. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we're still in public comment, so.
Yeah, I'm
Why don't-
sorry. I didn't look up and see Bill. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll go ahead. Thank you.
William Quimble, 6280 Horseshoe Bar Road. Mary Beth, when you're calculating the floodplain, do you what year flood level is it like 10, 20, 50, or 100-year flood?
100-year flood.
100-year flood? Okay, basically Armageddon. Thank you.
The worst possible.
Okay.
David Ring, 3486 Del Mar. Two things. It sounded like you said the reason they were doing this was for tax purposes, but then it also sounded like the reason that they were going to end up paying more taxes. That didn't make any sense to me. Is that what you...
That is correctly what I said,
Okay.
but that, I don't know the reason why they initiated this.
Okay.
I know I received the application. My guess is the assessor looks at it and says, hey, you've got structures on an unimproved property, and that needs to be corrected.
Okay. And so my other comment is the parking that's currently existing, does that meet all of the disability codes that are the current codes?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have to include that in anything. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, seeing no further public comment, next was opportunity for applicant to address any questions that may have arisen from public comment. So if you have anything to say as a result, okay, nothing. Okay, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. And go ahead, James, pick up where you were.
I could be misremembering, but some of us were on the Planning Commission when that raised building was put on. And I remember there was a discussion of building being designed so that the water could flow through without serious damage. And I don't know if that was just the raised building or if the other earlier building, which has concrete floor and is designed for animals and has to be probably washed down and things, if that also, even though it was not raised, I have vague memory that that was also designed so if there was a flood, the water could go on through without serious damage.
That would make sense.
Okay. All right. Got a quiet group tonight. That's okay. So if things are looking pretty good. If there's no other questions or comments, we'll go ahead and with the recommendations are to adopt the notice of exemption for CEQA, and then also to adopt Resolution 1909 approving the minor land division. So if we have a motion, we'll go ahead with this.
I recommend we adopt the notice of exemption per staff recommendation. I typically wait it out.
We'll wait. It's a little Loomis thing. Well, public comment's closed, I'm sorry.
It's not public comment. She said, I want to hear what you're saying, and I can't hear you, so I...
Oh, that's where we're pausing, I'm sorry.
I,
We're pausing for the train? You can't hear me? Oh, I'm sorry.
when you were speaking, I could not hear you.
Okay, I apologize.
Before the train.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Let me just restate what I was saying.
Sure.
Just that we're requesting that a motion be made on this item number 6 for the land split. Okay.
I thought it was done.
I thought it was done.
I did too.
Long train.
Yeah. Those are the empties. It is long.
Usually my cue to fall asleep. You can hear it off in the distance.
Everybody's going to go to sleep. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
My goodness.
So we normally don't start till 7:30.
Okay, Gene, I think we're good.
All right. Per staff recommendation, I move that we adopt the recommended notice of CEQA exemption and adopt Resolution 1909 approving the minor land division, and
We can hear you.
We can hear you. Go for it.
including the findings in Exhibit A and the conditions of approval in Exhibit B, as depicted in the tentative parcel map C.
I second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes.
Commissioner Lennon?
Yes.
Commissioner Hogan?
Yes.
Chairman O'Brien?
Yes. Okay, item number 6 passed.
Longest one.
Thank you.
And I'm a car counter.
And we'll just wait for the train to go before we move on.
That is a really long one. Well, from childhood, I've always counted cars, and that's long.
I think that's the last engine.
And this is a clicker, right?
How many
The engine.
how many pushers did it have?
Okay, we'll move to item number 7, general plan update.
Good evening again. This is another session in your education on the general plan. So far, we've talked about the overall general plan. We've talked about land use. And tonight, we're going to talk about the conservation element, open space element, noise element, safety element, environmental justice element, and air quality element. give you a heads up, Mr. Snipes will be talking to you about the circulation element at your November meeting. And then the housing element, we're hopeful to have a presentation probably at your January meeting on the housing element, and we're going to have more information at that point in time than we have today. As you know, a number of laws recently passed, and it's taking a bit to examine what that means to the town of Loomis and your housing element. The adopted elements we've gone through before, so tonight the adopted elements in the Loomis general plan that we're covering are the public services, facilities, and finance element, the conservation of resource element, which includes your natural resources and open spaces, and air quality, your cultural resources, and also the public health and safety element, which is safety and noise. So while the state general plan guidelines have elements they recommend, the town of Loomis has merged some of those elements into the elements of the Loomis general plan. One thing we hadn't talked about before, what are required in each of the sections of an element. One, you have to have the setting, and this is to be the current setting in the town of Loomis that would set the basis for your decision making. I want to point out that the element needs to have a narrative, a vision, expectations. And it's one of the things in attending the Planning Commission meeting, City Council, Town Council meeting, and also the town talks. People have pretty clear expectations of what they expect the general plan to accomplish, but it's not written in the general plan. So I would hope that given the enthusiasm and persons wanting to really express what is going to happen in Loomis, that we can actually look at this narrative section in the general plan, which will help guide future planners when a project comes in and you have goals, objectives, but it helps guide how to interpret those. And so it's one thing that I think we could all work on, and definitely the Planning Commission should be thinking about as we enter into rewriting or updating the general plan. Each of the elements needs goals, and these things are things that may or may not be accomplished, but it's a goal of the town that you hope to accomplish. Then also objectives, and these are quantifiable, and they have to support the goals. And in the objectives, you're going to explain how do we expect to get to the goal, what's the objective, and how do we get there. And then there are policies, and this takes it down another step. It's a more detail, and these then becomes the policies of the town of Loomis in implementing your general plan, your zoning codes. And then there are implementation measures. They have to be quantified and also scheduled. And generally the schedule is short-term, intermediate term, and long-term. Short-term is generally 5 years, something that you can see happen. Intermediate term is generally that 5 to 10, 15-year time frame, and long-term is that 10 to 20-year time frame in setting your implementation measures. But the one thing that they do require is to be quantified, that you can then determine when they have been met, when they've been applied. So the conservation element, and this comes right out of the general plan guidelines, and you'll note as we go through each of the elements are a little bit different. I think it's based on when the law was adopted, when the guidelines were written. But in the conservation development, and you need to talk about conservation development utilization of your natural resources. So that includes water and its hydraulic force. That would be erosion and those kinds of things from flooding or from stream channels. It needs to talk about soils and the maintenance of the soils. It needs to talk about other waters, which would be your streams. You don't have any rivers or oceans here. It needs to talk about fisheries, wildlife, minerals, and any other natural resources in the town of Loomis. And the element needs to take a look at the effect of development within the town of Loomis on these natural resources when you're writing your goals, policies, implementation measures. And it also requires that the town coordinate with resource agencies, which the town does with California Fish and Wildlife. You talked about FEMA today, so that is going on, but it is required that you coordinate with agencies in writing your conservation element.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you sure can.
How about effective development that's not in Loomis, but still affects things around here, including our wildlife and things like that. We're
In
not
that-
responsible to say anything?
Not as part of your general plan. And Monique and Mary Beth, I don't believe the town of Loomis has a sphere of influence. And typically, when you have a sphere of influence, then that gives you the authority to comment on those lands outside the town limits in that sphere of influence. So it's something we may want to consider looking at, but I know some individuals in history didn't want a sphere of influence because one of the other things a sphere of influence can do is say, we're going to someday expect that that becomes a part of the town of Loomis through an annexation. So some people are concerned about that. So there's kind of two parts. The sphere is one to identify where you could grow, but it's also what parts outside the town have an impact, and you want to make comment. Either your sphere would be in the county or city of Rockland, so definitely you want to have that discussion. So it is appropriate in a general plan to, in a narrative form, talk about things that are going on outside of the town limits from the standpoint of how it would impact the town and what you would like to see happen. But that's generally in a narrative form that probably would go at the very beginning of the section. It's not going to be a goal or policy or an implementation measure.
Thank you.
Yeah, the open space element. Open space is any land or water that is unimproved and is devoted to open space use. So it's a pretty broad definition of what open space is. And we're required to talk about open space for natural resources. We're required to talk about open space for the managed production of resources. That would be if there's agriculture in the town, the orchards, any other agriculture that is going on. Also open space for outdoor recreation, open space for public health and safety, open space for tribal resources. And again, general plan guidelines require that you coordinate with federal, state, and other local agencies in working on your goals, policies, implementation measures. The noise element. Primarily, this element talks about identifying and apprising the noise problems and the quantity of noise that is generated. And definitely, as we know here, trains are one of your noise generators, along with roadways, and often there are businesses, industries that also generate noise. And so highways and freeways have to be evaluated. Your primary arterials and major local streets need to be mapped. Passenger and freight train operations and ground rapid transit need to be discussed. Aviation, industrial plants, and other stationary sources of noise within the town. So primarily this is much more of a setting section of what's out there, but your goals and policies will talk about protecting some of the sensitive resources, such as if there's hospitals, schools, housing for the elderly. Those kinds of things are generally considered sensitive uses, and you may have goals and policies that would talk about those things and in introducing noise sources close to those things. The safety element is basically safety from unreasonable risks, and that would include slope instability, seismic risks from earthquakes, flooding, wildland and urban fires. Climate change adaptation and resilience is a new section that you haven't addressed yet in your element, so I want to point that out. That is information that is going to have to be added to your safety element. And then also identify feasible mitigation for these things. And again, coordinate with state and federal and local agencies. So I think this is the first time that I put it in blue. Something that you don't have currently is in this presentation. Just to identify, we need to add that to your element. Environmental justice. This is new totally. And it is for the town to identify the disadvantaged communities within the town. And the purpose is to reduce the unique or compounded health risks of those communities through pollution exposure, food access, safe and sanitary homes, and physical activity of those living in the area. It's to promote civil engagement in decision-making, basically having the community come in and work with you in updating your general plan and later on in reviewing projects as they come forward. It's to prioritize improvements and programs that address the needs of disadvantaged communities. And the definition within the general plan guidelines of a disadvantaged community is a low-income area below 80% of the statewide average, and also public facilities such as the town hall, parks, recreation facilities, and amenities and services within the town. And this is really intended that you don't put all your low-income housing next to the industrial courtyard, and is, to make sure that you're not putting people into disadvantaged situations, and to look at where that is. So this also definitely ties into land use element and the land uses that you designate of where people can reside. Air quality element, this is clearly tied to the circulation element, but it's to report and describe the local air quality conditions. Generally, this information is going to come from the Placer County Air Pollution Control District. And it's to summarize the local district, state, and federal policies, programs, and regulations. So again, in your air quality element, you're really drawing from other agencies and their programs and reflecting those in your air quality element to acknowledge those. New consideration that we've talked about, and this will be in also in the circulation element, but is vehicle miles traveled as a new threshold in your environmental documentation. And then also infill development where it occurs, and are there impacts to the infill development because of existing air quality problems. So then information is available to everyone on the Loomis website, and Carol is keeping that up to date. These presentations are going on there, and as we gather information, that will be provided on the website so you can research it. Something brand new, there is now a new email address. So if you have comments on the general plan, you write them to gpupdate@loomis.ca.gov, and we will then be collecting those comments through this process. Snail mail also works, sending it to the P.O. box in Loomis, or drop it off at the counter at the town hall. Again, we want to offer that the staff is willing to meet with anyone by appointment and to talk about the general plan and issues. And also there will be workshops and hearings beginning next year as we go through this, as we gather the information. So to kind of remind you where we are in the process, we're still generating information such as this, what needs to be changed, and this is part of what needs to be changed. We're looking at the setting sections that need to be updated. This information will be gathered and then presented in public meetings, workshops, to say this is what we found, this is where we need updates, here's some recommendations, and then begin to have the discussion. After that discussion period is done through a variety of methods, then we'll be asking that information to come to the Planning Commission to say, of what has been said, what do you recommend to the council for incorporation into the general plan update? At that point in time, we go to the council and they direct us to actually do the update to the general plan. So the intent is to have a significant amount of public input discussion over these things before we actually start writing text to the general plan update. And so that there's hopefully some efficiency in that process. But definitely the email is open and operating, and thank you, Carol, for setting that up. And so if you have any questions, be glad to answer them.
I do.
Yeah.
With regards to especially the environmental justice element and trying to get civil engagement, I'm involved in the census outreach right now, and a lot of times, even though I know that we're making a lot of effort with the town talks, with all of the presentations, there's a lot of members in the community who are just completely not connected with that. And so is there any, plans for trying to actually go into the community and maybe even just passing information, with the email or with the contacts, and exactly kind of like a flyer of what's going on?
At this point in time, we have been asked by the council to come back to them in November with a more detailed approach than what we have right now. So this all kicked off a little bit faster than we anticipated, so we're catching up to that. But in there that will outline the approaches to get out into the community, provide information, possibly through buildings you provide information. Not everybody has the internet, not everybody gets is able to go to the general plan website. And I think we'll be talking about going out to groups and organizations and making presentations similar to the land use presentation at the Town Talk meeting. And if you have recommendations on how to get out to those groups and where you think there may be disadvantaged groups that would like information, provide that to us, and we'll make a point of going and talking with them.
Also, the next town newsletter, I think they're going out quarterly. They've got a little blurb in there, so those are actually mailed to everybody in town. So that's a direct dissemination there.
Right. And I do know the town has a mail list, and we can, if there is special information we want to get out, we can also get that out. And I think especially as we move into the workshop portion, definitely we want to publicize that a lot to get people out. And hopefully we'll make them something that's enjoyable to participate in and have people come in and engage.
Could you talk a little bit more about on environmental justice?
Mm-hmm.
The disadvantaged community, and it says low-income area. Does that mean that we are a low-income, or we pick out places in town?
We have to identify, if we're aware of any low-income areas that basically the persons living there are below the 80% statewide, we need to identify those on a graphic. So that would be done with GIS.
Taking individual household?
There is information through the census. There is information from the state of California that probably not by house. You can get information by household, but it would probably be displayed as a blob of we're aware that there are issues in this area as far as probably residents who fall within that category. So we're not going to go down parcel to parcel and say, you are, you're not, but it would be, this is a general area that is known to have persons that are in the lower income level.
Do you happen to recall offhand what is the statewide? So this is the statewide, not the county, not SACOG area, it's the state?
This is, according to the state, this is statewide, correct.
So 80% of the statewide?
Correct. Which is how, as you know, you're talking about the RENA numbers for housing, and generally this is going to be your low and very low income individuals within that area.
I thought the RENA numbers were based on local numbers, though. No, they're state?
No, they're based on state Department of Finance numbers.
Oh.
Yeah.
And what is the point of the public facilities? To show what things we have that would ameliorate that kind of the low-income disadvantagement?
It's two things. You in your public facilities, especially parks, whatever, you don't want to be, you want to recommend against locating, say, an industrial plant right next to one of those things, or something that is going to cause air pollution, vibration, hazardous materials close to any of those communities, and that includes your public facilities. Okay. On the same hand, you probably don't want to put a new housing development right next to the town corporation yard where they're quite busy all the time. So it kind of goes both ways. Yes.
So I'm kind of looking at this, I'm just trying to break this all down so I can process it in my mind to see how this is going to work.
Okay.
And how it's going to be effective. So I look at this as just kind of a general outline.
Correct.
And we, as you know, we're students, and we're going to come in, and your task is just to kind of answer all the questions. Now, when we have the workshops, do you seed the meeting with some thoughts, suggestions, starting points? Because it seems to me people are going to come in and without training and knowledge about community planning, they're going to come up with, including myself, with suggestions that are not necessarily relevant, or they,
Right.
in other words, they're not understanding the process.
What I envision is there will be a document that goes out, maybe more than one, but it will identify, first of all, within your existing general plan, what holes need to be filled because of state law, and we'll talk about that. I think we'll be updating the setting sections, so there will be new setting sections, and based on the new setting sections, we'll identify within the general plan goals, policies, objectives. Do some of those need to be looked at? And it could be you could do this or you do that. There may be alternatives to how to approach it. Plus, as we receive comments and people say, we'd like to see this happen or that happen, that will be incorporated also into this document so that you can, by element, you can see the various recommendations. And it might be a little overwhelming, but I think what we can do in the workshops is similar, maybe take one element at a time or a couple elements at a time and work through with the community, those points, and then give options of you could do this, and these are the implications of you taking those actions. Definitely one of the things that I would love to start gathering right now is that narrative. What is the vision? I've just heard that so many times saying, well, this is what the vision of the general plan was, but nowhere does it say that. And so I'd like to capture what people have as a vision of the town of Loomis general plan, what it will be, what it will look like, into these statements that will help guide then your goals and policies.
Okay.
And do you work with partners such as the schools? And so I'm thinking specifically of like the vehicle miles traveled and how we can actually maybe create some, safe routes to school so kids can walk and ride bikes and those sorts of things?
In this process, definitely you're going to go out to the schools and talk with them and look at things that can be done in the general plan that are not there today. We'll again start. Is one of the questions I think for everyone in the community, is the general plan doing everything you want it to do? And if not, what do you want it to do? And let's discuss those things to add it. Because I think, it's been 19, almost 20 years that you've had this general plan, and I think you've done pretty well with it. So my guess is there's not a lot of things you want to change, but you may want to tweak them, especially with the narrative, kind of provide some more description of this is what we expect. So into the future, your planning staff and future planning commissions have an idea of what you were thinking about as you updated this general plan.
And then who determines the sphere of influence? Is that Sparta or?
No, that's the Local Area Formation Commission that you would go to and make the request. It's a separate process. But in the general plan process, what you would do is discuss it, make recommendations. The general plan will discuss a sphere that you don't have one or you want one, but that does go to LAFCO. LAFCO is made up of representatives from each of the towns in the county.
Okay.
And yeah, that's a political process for sure as you get there. But I think, again, if you describe what are we trying to achieve, and I think as Commissioner Wilson said, we are concerned about what happens in our neighboring jurisdictions and things that are impacting us and how can we resolve those things. Those become part of the reasons for expanding that. And that's really important to have that dialogue with your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we open public hearing and have a public comment section.
Sonia Coupler, 5630 Tudor Way, Loomis. One of the first slides that were presented said something about the town center master plan being adopted, and it's my understanding from someone that I spoke to recently, they said that the town center master plan was never formally adopted, and I just wanted to get a clarification on that.
I was not here at the time. My understanding, looking at your general plan, there are goals and policies about the town center master plan in the adopted document. I don't know if they took the town center master plan and just adopted it, or they took parts of it and put it in there. So it's one of the things that we will find out and give you an answer to.
The general plan does have, I don't remember the page right now, but it does have a reference to the downtown master plan being superseded by the general plan, however, being retained as a reference. That was the phrase, retained as a reference. But as far as to what extent it was officially adopted, I don't know. Before my time on things.
Hi, Sue Dobies. And I just wonder if you could make sure again that you're speaking to your microphones.
Okay.
And sir, when you were speaking, you're speaking away from us, and it's hard to hear you sometimes too. And I guess I may need a hearing aid one of these days. But anyway, I'd like to know how we can get a sphere of influence, because it sounds like it'd be a good thing to have.
Again, how to get a sphere of influence is, first of all, in the general plan, you need to discuss that you want one, and you need to describe the boundaries of that sphere of influence and the purpose of the sphere of influence. So if the purpose is to not annex land, that should be clearly stated in your recommendation. Once the general plan is adopted with that text, then what you do is you begin the process by taking that request to the local agency formation commission, and they will have hearings on it, and they will make a determination if they adopt such a sphere of influence. But I think it is important within the general plan process to discuss what you want to achieve with a sphere of influence, and it's probably very important, given some of the comments I've heard, to note that you're not intending to annex, but these are portions outside your community that are impacting your community, and therefore you would like to have some say about it. Definitely known.
And just to add to that, the sphere of influence would be in the unincorporated county of Placer and not other cities. And you would, as Mr. Hoggy articulated, explain the purpose and need for it. Sometimes the sphere of influence is simply to add a seamless division between the town and Placer County so that the boundaries are not so rigid, and you can literally influence design or other things that are going on nearby policies. If you take it one step further, you can, after you've had a sphere of influence, try to annex that to become part of the Loomis limits. This is all extremely political. It requires the cooperation and agreement of the county as well, probably before you even submit an application to the LAFCO. And even if you did do that, and even if you wanted to move forward with annexation as an example, you would then enter into a tax sharing agreement with the county in which you're agreeing for a certain period of time, sometimes in perpetuity, to give back to the county that portion of taxes that they would have otherwise received had the town of Loomis not annexed that property. So it's a very long, drawn-out process. It takes years. It's political, but it is an option for the town to consider.
David Ring, 3486. I had a couple questions, and so should I ask them all, or should I ask them individually and wait for an answer?
Probably, usually under this format.
Public comment, just ask them all.
Ask them all,
Okay.
and then we'll get back.
All right, so my first question then involves the natural resources. And so for the natural resources, for like the air quality, you can put numbers on that and you can quantify that. But if you're talking about other natural resources, do we need to quantify them? Like, you can't just say, I like deer in the general plan, right? So you need to, would you say we want a certain level of fauna? I mean, can you quantify that? That was the first one. And then I thought I remembered you saying something earlier at one of the previous meetings that the ordinances are they part of the general plan, or are they a complete separate thing, or do they, because if we wanted something for, because this talked about the noise ordinances, do we put them in the general plan, or do they stay as an ordinance in a separate document that we just refer to in the general plan? Because if the general plan is the Constitution and the ordinances are not, and the general plan just says we just want a little bit of, we just want to protect our noise levels, and it doesn't say anything in the general plan about that, and this ordinance says something else, then it's not part of our constitution, so they should be able to go around that. And the last thing is, are we allowed to make ordinances that are more strict than, say, the state are in certain things? The thing I'm thinking of is when there was a recent development that was planning on going in, the houses were very close together, and I thought, from my personal opinion, was that they were so close that if there was ever a fire that hit one of them, it was just going to blow the whole place down. Like if it was a bad fire, it would do that. And when I had talked to the developer, they said that they met all of the state requirements, and I thought that may be true, but I felt like it was not as safe. The state was not acting safely in that case, and so I was wondering if that is allowed to, if we're allowed as a locality to go above and beyond that. All right, thank you.
Okay, let's start out with natural resources. If the community is talking about, say, the deer or the birds or whatever, you can have goals and policies that talk about preserving those. And to give you an example, I worked on the Folsom General Plan, and as we were going through that, people were saying, we love the deer, we love to see the deer. Well, we had the biologists come out and talk about how the vernal pools grow, basically are the support for the deer, for the eagles and whatever. And out of that, the town had a policy of preserving those vernal pools, which is now the Humbug Willow Creek Parkway that goes from Folsom Lake down to Lake Natoma, provides that corridor, both for animals and also for bicycles, hikers, whatever. So again, the vision, we like to see the birds, we like to see the deer, we like to see the oaks. Those are all things that you can put into the general plan as your vision, and then you have goals and policies that will implement that. And it could be implementation measure would be the creation of a parkway or a trail or some other thing that would be able to accomplish those things. So those are appropriate to talk about, and the biology and natural resources really are combined. You can't separate those things out. So you have to look at that comprehensively because it is extremely dependent on each other. So, if the vision is we want to see something, preserve something, then let's talk about it and figure out how to make that happen. Okay, my mind, I remember the last one. What was the second question that was asked?
General plan and ordinance.
Okay. The general plan is your constitution. Ordinances come under the Constitution. The ordinance can be more restrictive than the general plan, but it cannot be less restrictive than the general plan. So there's a cap with your general plan, and the ordinances fall under it, and they are separate. So when it comes to the noise ordinance, your general plan may have goals saying we want a community that is quiet, is serene, except when the train comes through. And then you would have possibly objectives of our noise limit at nighttime is not going to be above a certain level. Then you could have an implementation measure that you adopt a new noise ordinance that sets limits for nighttime, daytime type use that would achieve that. So that's how that works. But your ordinances can be more restrictive than the general plan, and your ordinances are currently more restrictive than the general plan in some cases.
Part of that question, excuse me, was can it be more restrictive than what the state requires?
Yeah, yes, your general plan and your zoning code can be more restrictive than what the state requires.
So if I could add two additional points. So your ordinances implement the vision that you adopt in your general plan. So while the policies in your general plan are more broad, the ordinance have greater specificity. So for example, if you say that we want our ambient noise levels to be equivalent to a room with 10 people in it, something like that, not too loud, not too quiet, then your ordinance would enact it and say, in the downtown area of Loomis, we're going to have these thresholds because we will tolerate and accept a louder downtown area. In the rural, we want it quieter than in other areas, and so you get into the nitty-gritty. With respect to the third question as to whether ordinances can be more stringent than state laws, it really depends. There are certain areas where the state has preempted us from enacting different restrictions. One that we're all probably intimately aware of now is in the arena of housing. The state is essentially telling us what, where, and how to land use plan our general plans and zoning to accommodate housing. So when the state has taken an affirmative position on certain matters, then we have to, in large part, comply with that. There are other sections, though. For example, if there's a fire code or Title 24 energy, energy efficiency, building codes, we can, in fact, enact ordinances that are more stringent than that. So the public comment that was made was, I don't want our houses to be that close together, even though the state fire code allows it. The town can, in fact, adopt more stringent requirements that essentially provide greater setback requirements. So.
Yeah. And that's kind of a new twist that the state government has sent us. You know, typically they don't get in, they don't tell us what to do. So that's somewhat a new twist to doing the general planning codes. And then the third point,
that one is except for the new second, the ADU, the new second residential and third. But now they are telling us no matter what setback, we want 4 feet, right?
Right.
And that's the point, is that if they have affirmatively preempted us from making more stringent regulations, then we cannot, even if we wanted to. But in other areas where the state has not spoken, then we can enact more stringent requirements.
okay, so that was the 3 points then?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Mona.
Okay.
I have a question then.
Okay, well, I think that was public comment, so any other public comment? Okay.
All right.
All right, seeing none, were you going to say something or no?
No, I heard a question
Okay,
coming.
we're going to close public comment and bring it back to the commission. Go ahead. Thank you.
So my question is, if we were to, in our updated general plan, address issues that the state has not yet begin to mandate or dictate, and then let's say 5 years down the road they were to change, which then takes precedence? Would we take precedence because we've already addressed it, or?
Very good question. So this is something that every city and county in California is facing with the adoption of Senate Bill 330 that was signed by the governor on October 9th, I believe. So there are provisions in that bill, just as an example, that state that if you get a housing development application, whether or not it complies with your zoning code, you must approve it if it meets certain requirements. So the state has affirmatively said, we don't really care what your zoning code says. We don't really care if you want to do this or not. We are forcing you to do this. So in your example, if the state were to enact a new law which was inconsistent with the town's general plan as adopted, the town would then have 3 options. 1, ignore it and face potential fines from the state or withholding of grant funding, transportation funding. 2, do what the state asks with an inconsistency in your general plan. Or 3, every community is permitted up to 4 general plan amendments annually, so you could amend your general plan to become consistent with that new law.
Okay. All right, well, I think that wraps it up. I thank you very much and everybody for your participation. And so we will go ahead and there is no action on this item tonight, so merely discussion. So we'll go ahead and close the item. And one of the last things we do, if there's any items from the commission that are not on agenda, this is the time for that. No? Okay.
So I can announce the next Town Talks in November is November 5th, 6 o'clock, and it's on affordable housing. The guest is Danielle Foster with the City of Roseville, although I believe now she's with the City of Sacramento.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to hear sometime about what the new, now that we know what housing laws the governor has and has not signed, I'd like to have an update. But I mentioned it to Sean, and he said, I think he said SACOG is working on putting something together, so that wouldn't really be available till sometime in the early new year, he thought. But
Okay.
I think that's something that we really are going to need to know.
Yeah,
Going forward, yes.
that's for sure. Okay, I guess the
Chairman?
next, Yeah.
Prior to adjourning, you went to commission reports, but I had a brief planning director's report.
yes, okay. Go ahead,
And
thank
it
you.
would address Jean's concern. Staff is working with town attorneys to provide a legislative update at your November meeting. So that should be a,
Good.
pretty inclusive list, and give them time, since most of them just got approved, and give them time to get through them and regurgitate them back out for us. My other, couple other items, Pine Star Liquor is no longer. It's gone.
Going down today.
So if you haven't seen it, it's kind of cool. Loomis Mill, which is the former WW molding site, met with the architects today, and they're looking at submitting their site plan design review application first part of November. So we'd be looking at having that come to you for review at the December meeting. SB2 grant monies, we're preparing application for council approval for $160,000 to the SB2 project. And that 160 comes to us, we've been involved in Civic Lab, all these, SACOG projects and stuff, and being members, we're eligible based on population size for the 160 now. And then in the spring, there's another 65 that we'll be able to apply for. So that's a good bump in kicking off our general plan. Public workshops, things like that, maybe a couple of technical reports. We are also looking at upgrading our building software. It's more of a permitting processing software, which will not only streamline building permits, but provide staff a better tracking mechanism to track all permits, not just building permits, but any planning entitlements, grading permits, anything that we issue a permit for can be built into that and identified by parcel number, and bring all of those things into one house, so to speak. Instead of having different folders and all of that in places, this will be all inclusive. So you would be able to go to our website, fill out a building permit application, pay your fees. It'd get sent right away to plan review, so that shortens that plan review time. Plan checkers can review it, forward it to the next one, and back and forth, and shorten up that process and get permits issued a lot faster. So some of that money might go towards that too. So. Also at the November Planning Commission meeting, in addition to the legislative update, we're looking at the release of the Costco draft EIR. So we'll do a presentation, staff will do a presentation to you on the Costco revised draft EIR. And so as you have time to review it, you have a little more knowledge under your belt, and just instead of take this and read it, here, let's kind of get you rolling on the process for it. Britt's transportation circulation element presentation I had scheduled for December based on the other two items on November's agenda. So if he wants to try to squeeze that in for you in November, that would be fine. If not, it would be forwarded to December. That's my story.
Okay. Great, thank you. That's a nice job. It's very helpful.
When do you anticipate that we would get the DEIR for Costco in relationship to the Planning Commission meeting? Before?
Do you know what the timing on, I mean, our timing is still a little
Okay.
mid-November.
It is intended that mid-November, the draft EIR will be released. We're internally reviewing the document now. Once that's done, then they will produce what they call a screen check that we have to review, and then there's the final draft and coming out. So there's some time to put that together, but right now it looks like probably the second week of November, somewhere in that time frame, it'll be out. And to kind of clarify, the presentation in November to the Planning Commission will really focus on the changes to the project from the previous EIR, and then the hearings on the EIR will be later in the process.
But our meeting is earlier in November, so maybe we'd even have a week at most, probably.
Yeah, you won't have a lot of time to review it, probably before the meeting, but at least when you do take that dive into it, you'll have the meeting knowledge to go forward with.
Okay. All right, just a reminder that the meeting is November 19th. Okay, not the 26th. All right, then I think that's everything. We'll go ahead and meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Okay, good job. That was...